Our breaking news. In the Russia investigation, the New York Times reporting this hour, President Trump's attorneys sent a 20-page letter to special counsel Robert Mueller arguing why a president can't obstruct justice. Now, the paper reports this letter was hand-delivered back in January and was an attempt to head off a possible subpoena for Trump to testify. I want to get straight to our CNN senior White House correspondent, Pamela Brown. And Pamela, I know you're just now getting a chance to really digest this new reporting from the New York Times. Tell us more about the contents of this letter and why it's important.
Well, the contents of this letter really spells out what we've been reporting, Anna, that the president's lawyers believe that he does not have to sit down with Robert Mueller's team and that he did not obstruct justice because he's the president of the United States. And under the Constitution, he is allowed to fire whoever he wants, in this case, the former FBI director James Comey, and that under the Constitution and as a result of the lawyer's interpretation, that the president can stop an investigation if he wants because the Justice Department is under the executive branch. So certainly the lawyers are spelling out in this 20-page memo that was handed over to Robert Mueller's team, according to the New York Times in January, a very broad interpretation of presidential powers. And they make the case in this letter to Mueller's team that they have already been so transparent with handing over documents beyond what they really had to do. They make the argument that there's really no need for the president to have to sit down with Robert Mueller's team. Now, for context here, Mueller has made the case to the president's legal team that he does need to interview the president to understand his state of mind, his intent, to see whether he intentionally obstructed justice. But the lawyers actually cite a case called ESPY, in which they say that under that case, the president must demonstrate with specificity why it is likely that the subpoena materials here, in this case his testimony, contain important evidence and why this evidence or equivalent evidence is not practically available from another source. So they're basically making the argument, look, we've handed over everything to you. You don't really have to sit down and interview him, or you haven't shown why you need to beyond the information we've handed over to you. So what is significant too is the timing of this being handed over to Robert Mueller's team, Anna, because it comes at a time where the two sides were actually discussing a specific date in late January for a potential interview. As you'll recall, CNN has previously reported that. And then at the same time, around the same time, when these negotiations about a specific time to interview the president at Camp David for several hours, the lawyers made this decision, apparently, and at that time it was John Dowd, who has now left the team, to send this 20-page memo to Robert Mueller's team and say, look, we don't believe that he needs to sit down and do this interview. Right. And it's the first time that we're seeing definitively that they told Robert Mueller's team that an interview isn't going to happen, or that they don't believe that it should happen under the rules, the Constitution, Anna.
Also interesting to get a glimpse into what they are actually saying to Mueller's team versus what they are telling us publicly they are saying to Mueller's team. Now, the president also sent a mysterious tweet a little bit earlier this afternoon. It now appears to be a reference to this breaking news that actually, I think, dropped shortly after the tweet came out. What is he saying? Right. We were all sort of scratching our heads, Anna. I was actually anchoring at the time, and when this tweet came out, and we were all sort of wondering, well, what is he talking about, leaking my lawyer's letters? And now, as you said, it does make sense in this context of the New York Times reporting the 20-page memo. In that tweet, he again reiterated what we've heard from him time and time again. There was no collusion with Russia except by the Democrats, he says. When will this very expensive witch hunt hoax ever end? So bad for our country. Is the special counsel Justice Department leaking my lawyer's letters to the fake news media? Should be looking at Dems corruption instead. There is no evidence that the special counsel leaked this letter. For context, this letter was sent by John Dowd, the former attorney for the president, to Robert Mueller back in January. And so the president is making a baseless claim there, sort of raising this question of whether the Justice Department leaked this letter. But certainly it gives insight into the legal team's strategy that we've been reporting on and what exactly they have conveyed to Robert Mueller, and just basically laying out
why they don't believe the president should have to be interviewed. And I can tell you from talking to sources, Anna, that there is a consensus that the president should not sit down with Robert Mueller. There's concern that it could be a perjury trap, and that if anything, they would only allow written questions. But then, of course, it raises the question about a potential subpoena fight. And Robert Mueller certainly has it within his jurisdiction to issue a subpoena if the president decides not to sit down for an interview.
And I'm just thinking of what Rudy Giuliani said a couple days ago about what they were thinking they might be doing this weekend in preparing for a potential interview. But now with the North Korea summit, that had been sort of pushed on the back burner. Pamela Brown, thank you for this new reporting.